A young man murdered in a small town.
You're shot at, your mother's shot, blood all over the place.
The killer sentenced to die.
I should not be here on death row.
The clock is ticking.
Tony Ford is the shooter. He's a cold-blooded murderer, and he deserves to die.
Did the police get it right?
Everything really hinges on that DNA.
Tonight, a new investigation to determine if the wrong man is about to be executed.
I'm charged with capital murder for sitting in a truck.
El Paso, Texas, the night of December 18th, 1991. Myra Murillo and her 3 children are at home getting ready to go out to do some Christmas shopping. Suddenly, 2 men break into the house, guns drawn. They're demanding cash and jewelry. An argument ensues, and one of them fires shots. When the smoke clears, Myra and her 17-year-old son Armando are hit in the head. When police arrive, Myra is alive, but Armando is already dead. Myra Murillo's youngest daughter IDs one of the suspects as 18-year-old Van Belton, a guy she knows from school. Later that night, Van Belton is arrested, and when asked who his accomplice was, he tells police it was 18-year-old Tony Ford. Van Belton is sentenced to 75 years in prison for his role in the murder. In his trial, Ford maintains that he never entered the Murillo's house. Despite his claim, and almost entirely on eyewitnesses' testimony, he is found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, 16 years later, Ford's defense team says their client got a raw deal, and they have new evidence that will prove Ford is the wrong man. The stakes are as high as they come. If his lawyers aren't successful, Ford will be executed by lethal injection. My name is Jerry Pallas. My partner, Reggie Britt, and I are former detectives with the New York City Police Department.
And you were a defense witness.
As experts in cases of wrongful convictions, Court TV hired us to investigate Tony Ford's allegations. With his death sentence looming, we wasted no time in packing up and heading down to El Paso.
So, Reg, what do you think? El Paso, I like it. You know?
The place they used to have gunfights, El Paso, Texas.
And Mexico is right, like 5 minutes away. Right there, off to the left here is Mexico.
The crime was as brutal as they come. Were the Murillos attacked on purpose, as part of a drug deal gone bad, or were they just in the wrong place at the wrong time?
That was a heavy-duty case. You had 4 people shot. 1 boy that died, Armando, a young kid.
And the poor mother is disabled.
Tony Ford claims he was just the driver and stayed in the car while the real shooters went into the house.
It originally started off as maybe like some sort of bad drug deal where somebody was going to collect some money.
Because allegedly, it's not a run-of-the-mill crime. I don't think they just went there while they was home to commit burglary. They went there knowing they was home to collect that money.
He drove him there. If you believe his story, he drove Van, he drove Victor, so he's got some guilt associated with this crime.
So if Tony Ford is to be believed, who's the other person in the house with Van Belton who fired the fatal shots? Dick Burr, Ford's appeals attorney, maintains the shooter was Van Belton's younger brother, Victor.
What happened that evening, the events? Can you go through that for us?
On the night of December the 18th, Tony was asked by his boss to go collect a drug debt. So Tony then got Van Belton to go with him. At the time he met Van to pick him up, Van had his brother Victor with him. They went to the house. Victor and Van got out of the truck. The 2 Beltons went up to the door of the house. Then they burst through the door, demanding the money. And the people closest to the door were a 17-year-old boy named Armando and his mom. So Victor then almost immediately thereafter shot Armando in the head, shot the mom in the head, and attempted to shoot Lisa and Myra. The problem was that Tony and Victor Belton looked pretty similar. And of course, This happened quickly under tremendous stress. Lisa Murillo kept her head buried in a pillow the whole time. So there wasn't great opportunity to identify the persons who did this.
Where's it stand now?
In November, we filed a proceeding in state court, in the state trial court, asking to have some DNA testing done of physical evidence.
What are you having tested?
We're having
this time?
clothing worn by Victor Belton that night tested. Victor was arrested when his brother Van was arrested. There was preliminary analysis done to determine that there were a lot of bloodstains on the clothing worn by Victor Belton that night.
And I think what we're looking for in that clothing is if there's any of the victim's blood. Is that
That's
correct?
Right. That's right. If it's victim's blood, then it certainly confirms that Victor was there.
Right.
The two sisters identified Tony instead of Victor as the person who was doing all the shooting. So that's the great significance of it. If it's not their blood, then it doesn't show anything.
In a way, Tony was kind of an instrument. I mean, he drove a car that brought these people in.
He said
He makes himself
drove people.
right. He drove. So we call acting in concert. Here it's called he made himself a party to that particular crime.
If he is culpable, at least at a conviction level, he's not comparatively culpable enough to have the death sentence.
Is Tony Ford the wrong man?
Absolutely. In my mind, Tony is the wrong man.
Looking at the photos of Victor and Tony side by side, it was easy to see how the victims might have made a mistake.
These two pictures of Tony Ford and Victor Belton, they still look very, very much alike.
They do seem similar, no doubt about it. That was the word on the street, that Van protected Victor. Victor was the shooter, and Tony's in there. But, it's this is the classic wrong place, wrong time, I mean, we gotta look for Victor.
There's a lot of roads to go down here.
Yeah.
Victor Belton has never served any time for his role in the crime. We learned that shortly after the trial, he left the area and might still be out of town. His brother Van is serving 60 to 75 years for being a party to the murder. I put in a call to the Texas DOC to see if I could arrange a meeting with Van Belton in prison. And Reggie was itching to meet up with Tony Ford. Ford has already had 2 stays of execution, and there might not be a third. The DNA test on Victor's clothes is likely the last chance that Tony Ford has to avoid execution. Local news anchor Elizabeth O'Hara grew up near the Murillos.
In El Paso, we just don't have crimes like this that happen. It just doesn't happen. And so I remembered that crime happening and it having been in the media. And the more I started looking into the Tony Ford story, the more intrigued I got, because it just didn't seem like this guy got a fair shake. Something was wrong with this story.
Well, when you say a fair shake, what do you mean by that?
When I started looking through the testimony, the trial transcripts myself, and looking at what it was that pegged this guy as the shooter, it didn't seem clear to me that anybody was 100%. And then when I started asking questions about the DNA, and I called Judge Moody, the presiding judge in the Tony Ford case, he explained to me that at the time that Victor and Van Belton were arrested, that Victor's clothes were confiscated. Nobody knew anything about what had happened to those clothes. Now, all these years later, the clothes is found and has blood evidence on it. That's the DNA evidence that's now being tested. And I asked him, what could it end up showing? And Judge Moody explained to me at that point that it would put Victor there at the scene of the crime. Tony Ford wouldn't have been there.
Right. And what happens if there's no DNA evidence? What happens to Tony Ford?
If that does not exonerate him, the execution date would be set probably 30 days from the result being made public.
So we're talking about maybe 60, maybe 2 months, 3 months tops?
Maybe.
That's...
Maybe.
This DNA comes back, he may not even see Easter.
Right. He must be saying his prayers that they find some victim's blood on that clothing, because if they don't, I don't see a new trial, I don't see any kind of hearings. I think it's going to be over at that point.
Tony Ford's execution was closer than ever before, but what Reggie and I found out the next week took us by complete surprise and threw the entire case into doubt.
Those could be your dying words.
they are my down words, and so be it.
When people use the term mobster, they refer to John Gotti.
He was always the strongest, the most violent, the toughest, and the smartest.
Charting the rise and fall of the Teflon Don.
Gotti was always the king of the hill.
He wanted to leave a legacy, and the legacy was essentially the destruction of the mob.
Mobsters continues with John Gotti next Friday at 9 on the Crime and Investigation Network. What if the wrong person was behind bars?
I might be innocent in prison, but what about the murder? What's he gonna do on the street?
Could you trust the evidence?
They had a tap on her phone. What was on that tape?
Investigator Reggie Britt is searching for the truth.
You think he had something to do with it?
Will justice prevail?
Tony Ford has already had 2 stays of execution, and now his life depended on some bloody clothes confiscated from Victor Belton, the younger brother of Van Belton, the man he says did the shooting.
It wasn't a one-on-one situation where somebody walks up with a gun and robs somebody. Yeah. It's a situation where he's got that gun pointed at 3 people.
4 people.
4 people. And one of them, he kills one of them.
Van's the guy that puts Tony Ford there.
We ran a background check on Ford, and Zippo, the guy had no criminal record. In contrast, both Van and Victor Belton had records a mile long. Assault, aggravated assault, the list went on. Other than driving Van and Victor Belton to the Murillo house, Ford was clean. He had no motive, no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and the ID evidence against him was questionable. The next morning, we set out to get the story directly from Tony Ford. He's in a maximum security facility in Livingston, Texas, about 12 hours east of El Paso.
Death row in Livingston, Texas.
Out in the boondocks. That's where they normally put these places. Out in the boondocks. I just want to know what he has to say about it, how he got involved in this, and about the Murillo family, what he thinks about it, how he thinks about them. Does he ever think about them?
What was his motive? Because nobody can answer that but him. Him or Van.
Yeah.
Ford started talking before we even sat down. It was clear that he was still angry about the whole affair.
You know, I should not be here on death row. I never should have been here on death row. I'm getting shafted here, I'm getting shafted there.
What do you mean you're getting shafted? I don't understand.
Because I'm charged with capital murder for sitting in a truck.
I'm sure you knew by the time you got to this trial what had happened to the Murillo family.
Yes, I did.
What did you feel about that?
Disbelief, you know.
You had no idea what had happened at the Murillo house?
No.
In your mind, what do you call that day?
A tragic event.
When you arrived at the Murillo's house, what happened?
When they went up to the house, you know, I'm looking at him from the back. Van runs and takes a leap and jump in the air and kick doors the house. And so when that happened, it was a loud crack, you know. So I started getting a little paranoid. And so I'm getting ready to start up the truck, and Van, he comes around the side, he jumps inside the truck, you know. I'm like, well, what about your brother? And he was like, man, you know, just like, but I'm like, you saying, what's up? And he just shaking his head, right?
When they informed you that you were being arrested for capital murder, what was your reaction? What did you feel, and what did you do?
My reaction to it was like, murder, what murder? It's like, I'm trying to go over in my mind, like, what it is that they're talking about. Because it just seemed like, you're saying, everything it didn't make sense. Okay.
Let me ask you something. The Murillo family, what happened to those people? Are you sorry for anything?
Yes.
What are you sorry for?
The whole situation. I'm sorry for everything that happened to him.
Are you sure you didn't fire that gun?
I'm absolutely sure.
That you never entered?
You never entered that house?
I never entered the house.
You swear to God?
I swear.